Hey folks, how was your day? If you enjoyed this day so far, round of applause for the organizers, please. It was an awesome experience. It was my first EuroRust, so I loved it. I can't wait for tomorrow as well. I do know that I stand before you and dinner, so I'll try to be quick and interesting. So before we move along, these are some of the places where I've done some damage in the past, and a way to get a hold of me if you want a snapshot or yell at me online. All right. So I gave this a version of this presentation at a different conference, and that conference was a systems programming conference, but with a heavy C++ track. And in order for you to understand the theme of this presentation, you need to understand my background and my context and how I came into Rust. And I'm going to try to frame the same kind of ideas in what we do at Microsoft as well. So when I gave this presentation at mainly a C++ conference, in a longer form and focused on that kind of an audience, it was a very interesting experience in terms of reactions I got on both sides, as you might imagine. What was interesting is that it wasn't the only Rust talk at that conference. And one of the presentations at that conference was from a long-time C contributor and expert, and it was a talk that had Rust in the title, right? And of course, I wanted to see it. And some of the points made on in that presentation was around, sure, all this panic around safety and C and C++ is justified, but the alternatives, meaning Rust, it's not, in a word, mature enough to proceed. So the only path forward is to improve C and C++. So very interestingly, my presentation followed this presentation, so I had a chance to do a rebuttal and present a more balanced thing there. And keep in mind, I do come from a C++ background. I've been doing C++ for over 20 years now, and I'm sort of recent Rustacean, but I'm fully converted, so you can be safe around me. See, I made my first joke, I said safe. Okay, so when I immediately, and by the way, Robert and we're getting along just fine. We've known each other for a while now. But when I saw that presentation, I was about to say tweet, but that's the wrong platform. This thing came to mind, and I just could not share it, because I feel that a lot of people that I talk to fall into these kind of buckets. Anyway, so the usual C++ playbook that you're going to see out there is let's just fix and invent some new thing that we can patch C++ with. Sort of challenging the dogma. Do we really need, is this safety really important? How much do we care about UB? Where are the optimization opportunities? Correct by confusion, a bunch of successor languages and proposals, even borrow checker ideas and trying to retrofit them in C++, and all these attempts that we can fix it, right? And some of them get real news coverage, and I'm not saying they're bad ideas. Some of them are grounded in very good research, and they're very interesting on their own. The problem with this idea is that they're just not C++, they're a different thing. And they don't get you all the way there. So you're doing a lot of the work without getting all the benefits, right? So it's, for C++ people, you're often in a tough spot, because you have to deal with existing stuff. You don't get the chance to break existing users. There's assumptions about how it can be used. You can't just develop stuff in a bubble. You have to interact with what's around you, right? So, and fixing C++ is, I would say, the biggest PR nightmare for C++ is C++ itself, not Rust people taking our C++ jobs, right? So it's all this fluff and panic and alternatives and lifeboats and let's reinvent it, let's put some bow on it, let's put some Band-Aid on it. They're all nice thought experiments, but in the end, you either write C++ with good tooling, or you just do something else. You can't just invent another dialect and call it C++. Mind you, I'm not here to start any language wars. I've done that. I'm done with that. I'm too old for that. I do love C++. I do love Rust. I don't believe it's a zero-sum game. And I think the recipe for success is playing nice together. And by this, I mean not us. Yeah, but people can be nicer too. But code needs to play nice. C++ has reached immortality in software. And you can't just displace it. You need to play nice with it. So we need to figure out how to do more Rust by interacting with existing code. Very few projects have the luxury of working in a bubble and not having to deal with existing corpus of code out there. Mind you, this presentation is not about programming, so I don't believe it's one of my rare presentations where I don't have any code. So it's perfect for this time slot. Just relax, anticipate dinner. This talk is about engineering. It's about processes. It's about problems, issues. It's sort of a case study kind of deal. Difficulties, how we approach them, some examples, not about coding. It's about the engineering process itself. These are the kinds of things that I'm going to try to go through, not necessarily in this order, but sort of broad, deep kind of deal. So it's about the path to Rust. And it's grounded in my experience at Microsoft. I'm not claiming this is everyone's experience. But first of all, why, right? Why do we seek this pain, right? We could just fix C++, right? Well, so it's a more nuanced thing here. So first of all, there's the bugs and incidents and vulnerabilities that we get in existing products and services. Everyone does that, but we are kind of a big target. Then there's security and all sorts of exploitations that we need to deal with, and we need to harden the code so that we're always reacting to these threats, and sometimes we kind of have to be ahead a bit. And then there's the other less known or less, I don't know, popularized side of things, and that's greed. Or, thinking about the environment. Sorry, I need to reframe it. So not consuming as much energy in data centers and making the services more lean in terms of consumption of resources, of energy, right? So reducing costs. And this is where it's no longer C++, which is the target. And it's the good old C# and .NET, right? So Microsoft has a heavy 20+ years investment in .NET, and a lot of the stuff runs on .NET. So a lot of the interesting opportunities where people are looking at Rust are because of cost savings. Okay, so all this deal with safety got aggravated in the last years. It's not like it's exactly a new problem, but when governments and organizations get in your face, it becomes more problematic, right? And indeed, if we look at trends of common CVs we see in products and services, most of them are related to memory safety issues, right? And even if I pull in more recent data up to this year, and if we look at the breakdown on root causes of these memory safety CVEs, if we just drill down on memory safety, we see that heap corruption, stack corruption, type confusion, uninitialized stuff, your typical things still are very much on the radar. By the way, if you are interested in security, and not just in the context of C++, this presentation by my colleague Amanda Russo, it's a very recent presentation. It's a very good set of case studies, mitigations, interesting exploits, interesting technical details of those exploits. So it's even if you don't care about Windows and Microsoft, it's fun. I would recommend you watch it. Okay, so if we look at this landscape, because I'm very interested in and not just me, many people are interested in these things, to look how we can mitigate these aspects. Because it's been a long journey for systems programming languages in improving security, object lifetime, type safety, bounce safety, initialization safety, thread safety, all sorts of issues that pop out. And there's various strategies. We've been doing this for many, many, many years. And in some areas, we've made very good progress. Other areas still remain poorly covered and without any great prospects of improving them, although we are actively working on all of those. So I'm not going to read what's on the table there, but you can sort of see how long efforts in C and C++ have fared compared to what we get sort of out of the box for Rust, right? And I know it's not the crowd to preach for this, but just to understand where we're coming from. And in terms of vulnerability classes and sort of some statistical data in how good we are at dealing with them in general, this might give you some idea. Just leave it a few seconds maybe to digest it. Okay, so we've been working at this for decades in improving security technologies for native languages. All sorts of acronym soups and technologies for static analysis, code gen hardening, dynamic analysis, and so on. So lots of stuff. If we look at the timeline, I find it interesting to look at it in sort of evolution kind of things. That doesn't mean they supersede each other. They were just advances along the time, right? So they complement each other. So when you actually need to do proper job when doing systems programming, and you need to be super resilient with these things, you need to do this gymnastic of all these tools and switches and scans and my God. And it's not the end, right? I forgot there's more, right? So there's newer stuff being worked on. You're going to hear probably a lot more interesting stuff in the space of cast guard, redirection guards, memory tagging, and other weird acronyms, right? So there's more stuff coming along the way. Mind you, some of these don't think Rust is fully immune to all these problems. Some of these issues affect Rust code as well. So, and a bunch of this work is not necessarily Microsoft specific. A bunch of this work has been done in LLVM as well. So you might have different acronyms for them, but some of the ideas transfer. Okay, some ongoing efforts here in Microsoft. Making incremental improvements in SDL operations in general, and in investments to evolve the needs of these cloud services and technologies associated with them. Right? That means keeping up with including Rust things, right? Completing deployment of CodeQL. If you're not familiar, this is the GitHub tool that will scan your things in pipelines. And we're trying to integrate some of the learnings that we're doing through Copilot engines to learn from these mitigations and see if better and improved analysis can be done here. Of course, we continue to invest in hardening C and C++ code. That's, again, that's not out of mind, out of sight, out of mind, right? That's bread and butter. Most of the code is C++, right? But we're standardizing slowly to C++ and other memory-safe languages in many of the new things we do, and even some of the existing stuff that we're porting up over to Rust. We continue to contribute and support the Rust Foundation, and we work closely with it to shape its charters in directions where we see the industry needs help. And we're trying to assist developers in this transition because it's not easy, as you're going to see some examples and case studies to follow. So we're continuously improving in developer tooling, right? Initially inward focused. Short term, we've done all sorts of efforts to eliminate and reduce the attack surfaces, block exploits, traditional stuff, static analysis, fuzzing, dynamic analysis, all those tools for automatic checks. Long term, there's more ambitious goal going on here. Combination of software and hardware to detect and eliminate these classes of issues altogether. You're going to hear a lot more about things like CastGuard and memory tagging architectures. I have here just a slide. This is not, by the way, a Microsoft-specific effort. A lot of industry players are very much interested in this. Google is looking at it, Apple is looking at it, and many other players are working with hardware partners to deliver solutions to build more robust mechanisms to detect these kinds of things. And you do need hardware support if you want to do a better job at it. I'm going to share the slides afterwards, and I have plenty of links in the slide deck if you want to read further on. Right, so I got this far, and you're probably getting already, what the hell is the Rust part? I'm going to start, right? So, yeah, Rust, have no fear, Rust is almost everywhere now in some form or another, right? So that includes the Windows kernel, and some components have been written in Rust. Many other things are in progress, and I can't talk about them. But I'm going to share some small case studies here to give you a glimpse of what's going on and some of the problems, right? And this was not an easy journey. When people tell you that this is an easy journey, they're probably facing easy problems. So it was very much a learning process at Microsoft. And we've been doing this for a couple of years now. It's not news. Maybe now it's more publicly known, right? But we've been experimenting this area for a while now. So it's an exploration. We need to figure out processes around this thing and gain confidence in these experiments and these rewrites. And we constantly evaluate such projects to see how they're doing, not just, oh, we did it, phew. How did we do at this job, right? How was the process itself, right? And the process is by no means over when you build it, right? That's just the beginning of the software lifecycle. So we gauge the impact on security because, again, I need to remind you, Rust doesn't guarantee security. There's all sorts of things where you have to pop up the hood and do some nasty things. And again, it's way better, but there's still considerations in play here. We need to gain experience here. We need to evaluate the costs of learning, the cost of porting, and tooling required around it. So we need to evaluate pain points for each project and each team to see how we can improve the situation for them and for others. We need to deal with hybrid code bases, right? Very few components and projects can be written in isolation. So interop and hybrid projects are very much an important concern. One of the first experiments that we did was a module called Direct Write, more specifically Direct Write Core. And this is the subsystem in Windows that deals with text layout and rendering. This is not one of the oldest components in the operating system, but it's pretty old by now. And the Direct Write Core is actually cross-platform because it's needed in some of the other projects that we do and that are cross-platform. For example, Office. The port began in 2020, and that was very much a learning experience for that team and the organization. So luckily, the boundary surface of this component was sort of based on a COM-like model, so it offered a natural surface to doing interaction with outside components, right? So it was intentionally chosen in a way that it would be an easier ramp into experimentation and learning. So this public API surface, being COM-like, offered a very clean separation with the rest of the system. I have here an infographic if you want to see some stats or some interesting details about this. I'm not going to try to go through these. Probably you can look it up on the slides later. Then another experiment that we did pretty soon after that was porting a GDI. Well, this is a much older component. We're talking late 80s, early 90s thing. It's a component in Windows doing all the basic 2D rendering. This is your traditional Win32 rendering surface. Being a fairly older code base meant the code made a lot of assumptions, was much uglier, a lot of C code. In some cases, did some very specific optimizations related to the time and era for which it was created and the hardware available at that time. So this was a much more challenging component, right? But we did rewrite not all of it at that point, just the region handling component in GDI, and we had that in flight testing to prove viability, right? We did performance benchmarks and wanted to make sure the performance of the ported Rust code was on par or better than the existing C and C++ code. We managed to boot an operating system with this component loaded. We managed to do proper interop where it needed. This component required more unsafe calls and more interop because it didn't have such a nice carved out interface with the surrounding environment, right? And the more the team rewrote out of this component, the less unsafe surface we had, right? When you start writing small bits, you need to do a lot of unsafe, and you have a lot of glue code with the environment. But the more you port, the more you reduce this weird interact surface with C++ or whatever you need to interact with. So the area gradually was reduced. We've even done some upstream contributions out of this work as well, stuff that was needed. More recent experiment, I think this was announced publicly maybe 2 weeks ago, if I remember correctly. For sure it was announced, so it's safe to share. OpenHCL is a para-virtualization layer built from the ground up in Rust. This is used in Azure Boost as well. Azure Boost is an accelerator system that allows a server to do proper virtualization. It assists the hypervisor. So OpenHCL, privileged guest compatibility layer, used by Azure Boost as a primary consumer, handles trusted VM launch, Azure confidential VMs, and so on, many use cases. This thing was a complete rewrite in Rust. You can read a detailed, not as detailed as I would like, article there about the project itself. And stay tuned, there's going to be more announcements related to this pretty soon, maybe even next week. And that's not the only thing. There's, like I hinted earlier, there's lots such oxidation efforts across the company. Both going from C++ to Rust and from C# to Rust. Interesting stuff in progress there. We're going to be able to share, and we might not be as transparent and open as other companies when we share stuff, but hopefully we'll be able to share more and more such successes as we move along. But first, we need to validate them internally, make sure we're satisfied with them. Some of these efforts will be open sourced, but for sure we're going to talk more about such investments and such efforts, which I think helps overall the community, helps gain confidence that if a company as old as Microsoft with such a beautiful code base can do this, then others can do too. And we're trying to share some of the learnings. We're trying to collaborate in open source as much as we can. I think you've seen that there was a significant shift in how Microsoft operates in the community and in open source in general. So as much as possible, a lot of these efforts will try to be open and contribute to existing projects so that everyone can benefit. There's no point in us inventing a better wheel if nobody else can use it. But there's complications, right? Mentioned earlier, one of the sore points here is Rust C++ interoperability. And although everyone can do it, nobody can claim it's easy. And I've talked to a lot of people from many companies. So I think we expect maybe too much out of this, right? So we want to avoid excessive unsafe. We don't want to pay any cost of data marshalling, avoid copying strings, and you don't want to pay for anything when you do these intro boundaries. You don't like boilerplate in the code. You don't want to do any kind of annotations and gymnastics and macros and tools to ingest stuff in your code. And you want it to be ergonomic so that developers would like to use it. Don't complain that it's a pain. You want it to work with dynamic libraries. And let me tell you, on Windows, that's a special kind of pain. With all the things related to how DLLs and C runtimes work, and yeah, it's fun. You want it to play well with the C++ ABI because there's assumptions about these things being able to interop sometimes at binary level. You want to have your investments in all sorts of tools that know how to deal with binaries to understand binaries that come out of Rust CodeGen. You want as much of this process to be as automated as possible. You want to have an easy life dealing with hybrid build systems. And whoever did CMake stuff or any other build system in C++ knows it's a pain on its own. Try combining that with Rust. It becomes even more fun. So anyway, this is a major area of research and experimentation. And man, there's a lot of experiments, like a lot. Each trying to solve some pain points with the previous experiments, but each sort of failing in its own way. We're learning. We're looking at a lot of open source stuff. We're talking to each other. Even the Rust Foundation has funded people to focus specifically on interop issue. People are concerned about this. It's actively being worked on, but it's far from great. So one of the things that I find most challenging in sort of makes me want to do this, because I see a lot of value ahead. And one of the last things here is most of companies that have very strict rules with regards to SBOMs and auditing and security. And Microsoft is clearly in that bucket. We don't get stuff from crates.io, right? Most companies have their internal crate registries where they curate the crates that they ingest from open source, and internal crates that teams publish. So you have to do a good job here in how you evaluate what crates can and cannot be used, right? What are the criteria for being able to use open source crates? Or even internal crates from other teams or other organizations. They might not be a good fit for what you want to do, right? How do you keep being rigorous about SBOMs and you want to make sure you mitigate risk with regards to crates. There's a lot of good projects out there, a lot of good crates. But you need to be very careful. And when more and more teams sort of embrace this, let's rewrite it in Rust thing, they will just go and be super enthusiastic. Oh, I found this crate that helps me. It's exactly what I need, right? Drop it in the project. Easy. Well, it comes with security risk, stability risk, support and maintenance issues, right? And we need to be proactive about these things. You can't just deal with them like way after you've ingested it and your project depends on it. It's much more costly to rip out a dependency afterwards. So we want to build stuff on stable and thriving projects, not just some hobby crate that has a single owner that is no longer maintained, right? Because the core maintainer lost interest in that thing. And maybe nobody else can keep going. Right? You can't just take over an existing project because it became a dependency for your project. It just doesn't scale. Sometimes you have to, because you ended up depending on it, and you kind of have to move it forward if you care about it. But most of the times, that thing just can't scale. So we're working on a set of crate evaluation criteria, and this is very much in flux. We're learning as we go here. We have many indicators in this rubric in how we evaluate crates, and we try to automate almost everything. Then we check against the whole corpus of crates that are out there, and against the corpus of crates that we see used internally, and we try to see how everything fares and how the scores look, and we look at individual crates that we care about and see why is it not faring as well in this criteria column or whatever. So we spend a lot of cycles and we think a lot about this stuff, and we're not the only ones. I'm hoping more of this can and will be shared by all of us that have such a system in our companies. But I think we're still learning. By talking to people from all around, people who are doing similar things are learning about this process, and it will take some time before we sort of gain confidence that the process works and the results are good and they fare well in time and so on. So it's very much a learning process. But I hope this thing will become a transparent process, will become something that is shared and community-driven at some point. But at this time, mostly big companies care about these security and reliability issues in taking dependencies. So we want a unified and unbiased scoring system, right? And with that, it's just one more thing is dinner, right? So I'm not saying it's easy. This path for us and many of the teams that I talk to has been uneasy. But so far, they're very happy with the results, and we still do it, right? And we try to improve the process, and we try to learn from each such difficulty, from each such experiment, and we keep doing it. And I'm hoping we'll reach a point where this kind of case study will no longer be necessary, where it just becomes natural to do these kinds of transitions and do these kinds of hybrid projects. I hope they will become routine rather than case studies that people look up to. Right? So, dinner time. Thanks.